Thanks for being here. There's a lot of you, so that's cool. Here we go.
U Street Escalator, September 27th, 2011.
I like that sound. That's an escalator at a DC Metro stop. The escalator has a plastic element on each side of each step that keeps the metal stairs from scraping against the metal siding, and a lubricant to keep it all running smoothly. But when it rains or snows, that lubrication wears off, and it makes a sound like this. Or it makes a sound like this. That's the Farragut North escalator. It kind of sounds like whales mating. Yeah, I'm going with whales mating. So here's the sound of the escalator at Columbia Heights. Here, brace yourself for this. This was described best by Chris Richards, who said that this is an aviary of chrome-throated ravens greeting you as you descend to your workday. All these escalators are basically identical. They have the same basic design, but they each broke in their own way. And the way that they broke gives each escalator its own character. Now, most people find the screeching and skronking of broken escalators really quite annoying, but once you accept that they are not going to change, and trust me, in the DC Metro system, they are never going to change, you will find pleasure in the accidental music of imperfect escalators. Someone even posted a homemade plaque that both makes fun of and exalts in the ridiculous moaning of the Farragut North escalator. It reads,
Whale Song Escalator. This escalator has been adjusted to emulate the pre-dawn calls of our deep-sea friends, the whales. Follow the serenade while you ascend to the surface, and enjoy the day.
Doesn't that plaque make everything better? What I love about that plaque is that these escalators are still broken. People still probably complain about them and want them to change, but the people who saw that plaque, they experienced something different. A designer did that. I doubt they necessarily called themselves a designer, but that's what they were. They made an experience better through clever graphic design. It's the stories of unexpected interactions between people in the built environment that I love to tell on my podcast. The little innovations and moments of everyday genius, even the design failures that tell us who we are through the lens of the things we build. This is 99% Invisible. I'm Roman Mars. Yeah, you can do it. 99% Invisible is a radio show and podcast about architecture and design, two disciplines for which the visuals tend to be very, very important. But being constrained solely to audio reveals something critical about how we can communicate the importance of design in everyday life. People always have different opinions about what is beautiful, what is ugly, what is tacky, and so on. But stories are universal, at least, if you tell them right. So, who here has heard the show 99% Invisible? All right, there you go. Who here hasn't? Be loud. All right. You're in for a weird hour, okay? So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to press some buttons. So I'm going to sort of crack open and then reconstruct an episode of the show 99% Invisible for you. There's a few different stories. So when I press a button over here,
S for sound.
It's going to make a sound. And so every time you hear a voice or a piece of music or whatever, it's because I pressed one of these buttons.
Sound.
You got it? All right. Also, this is radio. I'll have pictures over here. Especially this first story has some really good pictures. But if you want to close your eyes, you want to lay down on the floor, I'd be super cool with that. Like, I would really like that. I didn't get into radio to have a bunch of people staring at my corpse sitting up here. So anyway. So you saw some beautiful things that you can do with images earlier today. I'm going to show you a different side of that. These are the greatest slides you'll ever see right here. Anyway, here we go. Again, this is 99% Invisible. I'm Roman Mars. It is the most reviled form of contemporary architecture there is.
A McMansion is an oversized house, usually over 3,000 square feet, that doesn't really interact with its environment, whether that's the houses around it or if it's built in the middle of nowhere, that environment as well.
This is Kate Wagner. She's a creator of a blog called McMansion Hell, where she helps readers understand what is and isn't a McMansion and why we hate them. These are her annotated pictures from her blog.
The main signs of a McMansion are that they're built cheaply with very cheap materials, new materials, rarely ever traditional materials.
As you can tell by the name of the blog and her general demeanor, Kate Wagner hates the McMansion.
They're built without any sort of consideration for the grammar of design.
Since the creation of the show, I've used the word architecture in the most tenuous and metaphorical ways. But according to Kate, the McMansion may not even qualify as architecture at all.
There's no real architecture in the McMansion, and it's too ostentatious to be considered folk architecture. They have no architectural commentary. All they do is represent sort of an ideal of wealth.
But it's more of an image of wealth rather than wealth itself.
It's very much meant to convey that one message that I have a lot of money and a lot of space, and I am putting it in this house that is so tall and so massive that you feel intimidated by it, just as you should feel intimidated by my apparent wealth.
That single purpose, to convey wealth, steamrolls over every potential design principle like symmetry, logical asymmetry, history, or beauty, which makes Kate really mad.
Yeah, who cares if you have a big house if it's like so ugly? I don't want to look at it.
Kate believes the source of the ugliness stems from the design process itself. During the 90s and 2000s, thanks to easy access to a lot of money through bad mortgages pushed on the American people, the taste of the new home buyer ran to the extreme. Standard models of these mass-produced homes reflected that. But if grand entrances and granite countertops and stainless steel appliances weren't nice enough, many new home manufacturers allowed for customizations that brought the veneer of opulence to the next level.
So they'll combine the two, an already designed prototype with sort of a custom home, which can end up in some pretty wild-looking results.
So they're designed and customized from the inside out, and it makes the outside kind of big and weird and lumpy.
Because somebody wanted cathedral ceilings in their bathroom, which is obviously a necessity.
The first victim in the design of the inside-out process is the roof. McMansion roofs are a mess.
The roof is sort of the number one way to tell a McMansion from a mansion, in that the roof kind of makes no sense. It's got various pitches, which is how sort of steep the roof is, and it's got many different shapes, many different heights, many different angles.
Like a gabled roof, with a hip roof, with a pyramidal roof. You don't really know what these have to look like, but you just have to know they shouldn't all go together like that.
They're really just there to put a hat on a ridiculously crafted house.
But the coup de grace of the McMansion roof is a feature that Kate has dubbed the McMansion nub.
The McMansion nub is where you'll see like a roof line that is relatively organized, and then you'll just have like this bump at the top because somebody had to have some feature and they just like couldn't fit it in linearly. Usually it's like either storage space or like someone wanted some ridiculous ceilings or ceiling feature. So they just have this like nub at the top. So it's like a hat to a hat, if you will.
According to Kate, another hallmark of the McMansion is the two-story entrance.
You walk into a house and there's suddenly, wow, so much space. Wow, look at our chandelier. Wow. It's so dramatic. That was the word that they use, is dramatic.
They being the real estate brokers and marketers and hosts of house-flipping TV shows. So they have a big entryway that you should probably have a pretty big door.
And then on top of that really big door, there's a really big window. Sometimes there's like 3 foot of useless space and then the really big window.
The window usually has a square bottom to match the top of the door and an arched top.
That kind of window shape didn't even exist really before the McMansion. The McMansion invented that window.
It's not only the window at the top of the door that makes Kate and the avid readers of McMansion Hell cringe, it's all the windows, and I do mean all of the windows.
There's usually more than 3 different shapes of windows.
Of course, there are always thoughtful and interesting violations of any design guidelines, but generally Kate thinks that a house should be limited to the front facade of 2 or fewer window shapes while keeping a single window style across the entirety of a single story.
I get ridiculous houses in my inbox all the time where there's like 6 different types of windows from 6 different architectural styles. It's sort of a garbled communication of sorts. You can't filter the signal from the noise, design-wise.
And last but not least, you can't have a big, ostentatious house without columns.
So the columns usually are either oversized or undersized.
Or sometimes the columns aren't columns at all. They're just column-shaped protrusions from the exterior wall.
Basically, a column is created to sort of balance whatever it is that it's holding up. That's the point of columns, is that they hold things up. I don't know, a lot of people seem to have not understood that in the last 30 years. But they actually are supposed to hold things up. And so if you have these really big columns and they're holding up the tiniest little pediment or portico, then it looks like pretty ridiculous. But the point is that you have the really big columns so everyone knows that you're rich, like a bank that also has really big columns.
All right, so this kind of snarky criticism is fun and all. It's really fun for me. But there's a larger point to be made about the design of the McMansion. According to Kate, the age of the McMansion saw the shift from the house as a place that we live in, potentially for the rest of our lives, to an asset that we decidedly are not supposed to live in forever.
People started designing their houses with the notion of selling them in mind. Realtors would advise, I wouldn't buy or do this because then the house isn't going to sell very well. So we sort of devised this culture where we thought about selling our houses before we even spent one night in them.
Kate lays the blame for this mindset at the feet of HGTV and similar channels. The excess and conformity of the McMansion was reinforced over and over again on home improvement and house flipping TV shows because the house as object could always be improved, but not necessarily to make it better, but to make it sell.
Home improvement channels would paint a house beige, and then you would see this ticker in the corner that says, we just added $800 to the value of this house, or something like that. They would come up with these crazy ways to quantify these sort of improvements that sort of cause people to go into these frenzies, and that's why so many houses look the same, is because this is what was told would make our house worth more, rather than what actually does make a house worth more, which is structural changes, improving energy efficiency, green upgrades, things like that. Not like adding a certain color of paint. It's totally subjective.
Older McMansions built in the early 2000s are not proving to be a very good investment.
Smaller houses are appreciating at a much faster rate than larger houses.
But after a lull in the market following the housing crisis, builders are finding buyers for new, huge homes again. According to CBS News, homes 4,000 square feet or larger saw a sharp jump in sales last year, rising 30% from the year earlier. It's safe to assume that all the bad design choices in the first round of McMansions will continue on in this next generation, which is not good news if you enjoy the vibrancy and variability of the built world.
Houses of differing styles, that's another thing that gives us a sense of place. You can tell that you're somewhere else because all the houses are different. But the sort of sprawl aesthetic is that it's the same everywhere. And, houses and styles didn't evolve through a planning committee. They evolved through a combination of popular taste and place. Like, that's why you'll see, Pueblo-style architecture in the West, but you're not going to see it in Cary, North Carolina. It's just one of those things that gives you a context of where you are, and that the built environment has everything to do with place as the natural environment does.
Embedded in the pages of McMansion Hell are lessons in consumerism and materialism, but Kate Wagner picks apart these crimes against architecture in hilarious and excruciating detail to teach us the fundamentals of architecture in a new way.
Using humor to educate people about the world around them is sort of a great way to get people involved in the sort of greater design community. Most people, what they learn about architecture in school is they learn like the Greek orders, and it's like, oh, this is the Ionic column, yes, this is the flying buttress, everyone snickers. And it's really dry. People like really don't care.
I firmly believe that people do care, even if they don't know why, even if we don't know how to articulate it. We feel the effects of bad design, whether we consciously notice it or not.
So now people can say, now I know why I hate that house. Thank you. Now it's like, wow, actually none of these windows match. I hate that. And it's empowering people to have opinions about the built environment, which they have mostly been served through like a marketing or materialistic lens, rather than from a design standpoint.
And as I've learned with pointing out the bad design of city flags in particular, once you get people to notice bad design, their annoyance, your annoyance, spreads like a virus.
I get a lot of emails, like, and a lot of messages that say, like, before I read this blog, I didn't give two craps about architecture. And now I start to notice these things on all of the buildings I pass by. And that makes me so happy because now other people have to suffer through what I have suffered for years and years and years.
And now we will all suffer together with our bad houses and our ugly flags and the doors where you don't know whether to push or pull them, and light switch where you never remember what they go to even though you lived in the house for 20 frickin' years, you know? I hate those. And our ugly passports and our Comic Sans and our public bench armrests and our bogus expiration dates and our confusing ballots. We really need to fix those confusing ballots right away, please. All that sort of stuff. This is what we are contending with right now. But it's not just bad news. We have some good news too. It isn't just the design of McMansions that are bad that drives Kate crazy. One of the things that Kate particularly objects to is that a McMansion in Texas looks the same as a McMansion in Seattle. They're the same hodgepodge of elements without reference to where they are in the world. But there are beautiful and functional regional variations in housing, from southern porches that have blue ceilings that draw mosquitoes away from people sitting outside, to thick Adobe walls that insulate desert climates from the extremes in their homes. Brilliant regional solutions to regional problems are particularly fascinating to us at 99PI, and the collector and champion of our running list of regional design genius is 99PI's own Kurt Kohlstedt, who's joining me on stage. Could you give him a round of applause?
Thanks, Ruben. So, I first encountered the tilt and turn window decades ago as a kid living in Bayreuth, Germany. And I was honestly a little hesitant pitching it to Roman because, you know, it's actually just a window. But the design is so nifty and multifunctional and practical. And to this day, I'm still surprised that I don't see them all over the US. So I'm a little bit obsessed.
And you made me obsessed, and we wanted to share that obsession of good design with all you.
And so, okay, the tilt and turn is effectively 3 windows in one. When you tilt the handle down, the window locks. Rotate the handle 90 degrees so it points sideways, and you can pull it open horizontally. But then if you twist it another 90 degrees, you can tilt it back down toward you. Now, this allows in breezes, but it also has a limited tilt, so it acts as a security window. And there are even these full door-size versions too, which I find really great. Cool. Oh, and to our surprise, this tilt and turn piece was a big hit, but with a divided reaction. Some people were really amazed that this thing existed at all, and other people were really amazed at that amazement because it was so familiar to them. You can find these things all over Europe.
In this globalized information age, it's easy to just assume that good design solutions will get picked up and spread around the world, but that is not always the case. Even now, some really clever designs are still regional.
And in some cases, it's easy to see why a design wouldn't spread. due to climate or culture or cost, and price might have been a reason that tilt and turns didn't take off in America. I mean, they really aren't cheap, but these windows also didn't fit in with American modernism and its focus on these hermetically sealed, temperature-controlled spaces that we're all used to. And modern architects just weren't as interested in things like windows that, actually opened.
So Kurt's obsession with the tilt and turn window prompted 99PI fans to send a bunch of other regional designs that they think people should know about, including this one.
The Japanese kotatsu table. It's a piece of furniture that doubles as a heating fixture. These tables are especially useful in Japan, where houses tend to not be that well insulated. And underneath the kotatsu, there's a special space heater. And above, there's a blanket that sticks out on all sides, so you can actually pull it up over you to stay warm while you sit around the table.
The kotatsu table is especially effective if you're wearing traditional Japanese clothing, that warm air from the hot coals or whatever. It's like it flows up through these big open folds of the kimono and out through the neck and armholes.
And you can trace the kotatsu's history all the way back to 14th century in-floor cooking stoves. Historically, the hot coals actually sat in the floor and were used as a heating source, first for food and then for rooms. Then over time, that heating source became electric and migrated up to be integrated with the tables.
Today, kotatsus combine elements of fireplaces, wood stoves, and space heaters.
But unlike most fireplaces that are built into walls, kotatsus can quite literally be gathered around. And unlike freestanding stoves, they're portable, so they can be moved around. And unlike space heaters, they have these cloth layers that you can pull up to help trap and channel the heat.
I just love how lovely that picture is. So Kurt is going to pop in every once in a while to give us nice jolts of pleasant design throughout the talk, while I'm here to ruin your day about the awful designs that we inflict on each other. So that brings us to our next story. I'd like to bring you all the way to beautiful downtown Oakland, California. Around the corner from our office in beautiful downtown Oakland, California is DeLauer's newsstand. It has been there since 1907. For people who live and work downtown, it is central to our existence. Everyone goes there to buy drinks, lottery tickets, little packs of fruit-flavored cigarillos, and occasionally even a newspaper.
163.
And as welcoming as DeLauer's is, at least to me anyway, about 8 months ago, it became clear that they didn't want people to spend time on the sidewalk outside of their store. Here's how you could tell. Started playing really loud classical and adult contemporary music on the speakers outside their store. And although I still see a fair amount of people hanging out in front of the place, the owner says it's not nearly as much as before.
Oh, big change. It was mess. They hung out outside and, just they playing dice on the street outside the door. And it was crazy. But now it helps us a lot. Even the customer telling us they see the change on the street here. I'm the owner of DeLauer's newsstand. My name is Fasil Lama.
When you have classical music, people who are young and cool don't really hang out there. So that's a way to deter teenagers.
This is Selena Savage.
And I am co-author of the research project about unpleasant design.
Playing classical music on loudspeakers is an example of what Selena calls unpleasant design.
Unpleasant design is something that works well at deterring certain behaviors and certain uses from particularly public spaces.
Along with her partner, Gordon Savovich, Selena collects these unpleasant designs.
Unpleasant design was here since we started designing public space or since we started designing cities.
Unpleasant designs are meant to exert a kind of social control in public by targeting people who spend a lot of time in public spaces, especially the young and the homeless. And the designs often end up pushing the so-called undesirable people out of one space and into another. Music is only one method of deterring teens from public space. In 2009, the BBC reported that the Nottinghamshire housing estates installed pink lighting to keep kids from congregating there.
pink lights, which would emphasize the skin, like blemishes on teenagers, which should result in teenagers not hanging out there. That's one of my favorite examples.
It's one of my favorites too, although there's not a lot of evidence that proves how effective it is. Pink lighting that preys on teenagers' insecurities is funny and kind of devious, if a little far-fetched. Another more substantiated example of targeting and trying to eliminate undesirable behavior with light is the presence of blue lighting in public restrooms. I saw this a lot in UK train stations when I was there.
Blue light of a particular color makes the veins slightly less visible.
What she's saying there is veins, so you can't see your veins through your skin, so it's hard to find a target if you're an intravenous drug user.
Then it became a very popular solution for all kind of publicly accessible toilets and even sometimes in buses. When your veins are not visible to you, you're obviously not going to be able to take any heroin.
According to Selena, lights are one of the original forms of public social control.
There was a bridge in a small town in Bosnia,
Specifically in the Kasbah of Visegrad, Bosnia, in the early 1900s.
where the Austrian government, who kind of annexed the country at that time, decided to implement street lighting, and that was very unpleasant to the locals, and the locals would destroy the light every night, and the government would reinstall it every morning. And so the idea that light is something unpleasant for free expression in public space is something that we completely forgot.
We've since become so habituated to public lighting that our primary experience with streetlights is that they deter criminal activity and make us feel safe. Unless you're someone who laments the lack of stars in the night sky or lives in an apartment with a window right next to a screaming bright bulb, you might never view streetlights as unpleasant at all, which is one of the reasons why the Unpleasant Design Project wants to point it out, so that it gets recognized as part of an overall design scheme that can take on much uglier manifestations.
Well, these studs may only be a few centimetres tall, but they've caused a big debate.
This is from a BBC News story in 2014. The reporter Nick Beak is pointing out an angry set of looking spikes that were installed in the concrete floor of a small alcove by the entrance of an apartment building. The spikes were clearly meant to stop people from sitting or lying down there.
Is this a legitimate way to prevent rough sleeping and possible antisocial behaviour, or are they a symbol of a heartless approach to homelessness?
Do you want to know the answer? It's that second one.
That spiked a huge debate, and even the mayor of London reacted and said that they should be removed and that we should not address homeless people in this way.
The grocery chain Tesco also added spikes in areas outside its interests. So one of the stores in central London in 2014, they were removed after days of public protest.
Generally, the debate was about the way we treat homelessness, and is that something that we just want to remove from a particular space, or is it something that we should somehow structurally address?
Spikes that stop people from sitting or lying down evoked a wide variety of reactions in the public.
The first time I saw someone lying here, a homeless couple actually, I didn't like it because I didn't like having to walk by them. That sounds very selfish. So when I saw those studs, I thought, good idea.
So a lot of people were bothered by the presence of homeless people, but some were also alarmed by just how aggressive the spikes are.
It's almost looks harmful. You know, if you lie on those, you're going to get spiked. And so it sends that message, which I think is wrong.
It's worth saying here that spikes are not just in England. We have lots of them in the US too. Outside of our office is a window ledge that you just naturally want to sit on. And sure enough, there are these black metal doorknob looking things that keep anyone from resting there. And one thing that makes these spikes and similar features especially frustrating is that they're just there. They're not moving. There's no arguing with them.
You know, if you have a policeman who prohibits people from sleeping in a park, I think there is still some possible negotiation. And I think that's good. That's what society is about, the ongoing negotiation and ongoing change. But when we start using things that are immutable and unchangeable, like metal spikes, there is nothing that is going to change until they rust. I think that's the most important criteria for calling something unpleasant design. It is something that you cannot negotiate with.
We've all probably tried and failed to negotiate with one of the most common and aggravating forms of unpleasant design, public seating. Whether it's in a park or at a bus stop, it was probably at the airport you came in to this conference. There are countless ways designers have made it so you cannot get comfortable, and most especially, cannot lie down.
A classic is the bench with armrests in between, which of course let you rest your arm on, on the armrest, but at the same time they restrict any other kind of use than sitting upright. The only way this bench can be used is by 3 people sitting next to each other and not looking at each other, which is not the only thing you can do on a bench. Especially, it's not the only normal and legal thing you can do on a bench.
Some of the things that limiting the ways that we use something can be problematic.
By attacking or addressing one particular problem, you actually generate many more problems and reduce complexity of possible behaviors in public space.
It's not just dividers and armrests. The Unpleasant Design book point out benches that are mounted so high that your feet can't reach the ground and therefore uncomfortable after a short period of time. And they document an increased prevalence of leaning supports at bus stops that you can rest against while standing, but they do not accommodate sitting or sleeping. But the object that Selena considers the masterpiece of unpleasant design is the Camden bench.
Basically, it is a design solution to 22, I think, antisocial behavior problems. The only thing it does not deter is sitting.
The Camden bench, so named because it was commissioned by the Camden London Borough Council, is a strange, angular, sculpted, solid lump of concrete with rounded edges and slopes in unexpected places. A critic on Medium called Frank Swain called it the perfect anti-object. It is anti-sleeping because the shape makes it uncomfortable to sleep on, anti-drug dealing because there are no slots or crevices in which to hide drugs, anti-theft because the recesses near the ground allow people to store bags behind their legs and away from would-be criminals, anti-skateboarding because the edges of the bench fluctuate in height, making grinding difficult, anti-litter because there are no surfaces or crevices where litter can accrue, anti-graffiti because it has a special coating to repel paint. And I think all those goals are completely noble, except for the sleeping and skateboarding part. I don't really want those other activities happening in the public spaces that I go to either, but Selena finds this litany of anti-measures demoralizing.
It discourages 22 things. It encourages to sitting and sitting together. When we expect people to do bad things to the bench, before we think of anything good that people might do to this bench, I think that's a very sad approach to public space.
It's also a contagious approach to public space. There's a chapter in the Unpleasant Design book that's devoted to all the unpleasant designs used to thwart pigeons in cities. Anti-pigeon spikes and nets are everywhere. But Selena says that aware of these measures, you're skeptical of the war on pigeons, you might notice that that same stuff is used against us. There's always aspect of coercion in design. Design is used to get you to buy things or use your iPhone in a certain way, sometimes without you even noticing or being aware of it. And these pieces of hostile architecture are no different. Of course, there are ways in which designers fight back to the soft walks initiatives. I created guerrilla furniture to attach to existing street infrastructure. The Archisuits project by Sarah Ross involves special outfits that allows people to overcome obstacles like bench armrests.
Design is something that is supposed to transmit a certain use of this object. Otherwise, it would have not been designed. However, I think it is very problematic when we start excluding people by design.
The reason we need a critical theory of unpleasant design is so we can recognize the coercion that is taking place in our public spaces. We need to know when we're replacing human interaction and nuance and empathy with hard, physical, non-negotiable solutions.
And this is what we wanted to achieve with this book, to start the debate. There will always be people who believe this is a good way and people who think it's terrible. And we are somehow not extreme in our opinion. We're really the observers.
And now you're the observers too. Whether a certain form of design is exclusionary but serves a greater good, or just hostile and offensive, it's important to be aware of the decisions that are being made for you, because most likely unpleasant design was put there to make things more pleasant for people just like you. Now, probably you don't design benches, but I think there's a lesson in unpleasant design for every designer. Ask yourself, who are you excluding and why? And is it making the world a better place? But a real better place, not just a better place for rich guys' apps. And know that answer and go out and do some good. Okay, so you got your marching orders. We got more good news. Kurt's going to come back, make us feel better about the good design in the world. Please welcome back Kurt Kohlstedt.
Thank you. When 99PI fan Anton Hegman wrote in, he was really excited to tell us about the design of, and I'm going to butcher this, Astien Kuis vas kapi. He wrote, being Finnish, there are many designers and designs I can be proud of, especially in architecture and furniture design. But there is one Finnish design that I am more proud of than any other, the dish draining closet.
A dish draining closet sounded like a strange thing to pick out as a national favorite, but Anton made a pretty compelling case for this pretty odd-sounding invention.
They're basically specialized cabinets that sit over sinks, and the shelves inside have slots, allowing dishes to drain. So you wash the dishes, then you just put them away. No drying required. And the design saves time and energy. It eliminates the sink-side clutter of dish racks. And the Finnish Invention Foundation named it one of the nation's best designs of the 20th century.
They're super low tech, but neat and eco-friendly, and you can find them all over Finland and to a lesser extent in other Nordic countries and elsewhere, but not in the US.
And the design dates back to the 1940s, when a woman named Maiju Geppard made her first prototype for the Finnish Association for Work Efficiency.
It turns out that similar designs were developed in other places, including the United States, but none of them took off the way that they did in Finland. It's still largely a regional design.
As Anton explained it to me, this is a quintessentially Finnish invention in that it's, quote, practical, unobtrusive, and cheap. When he moved abroad, though, he suddenly found himself without one for the first time. And Anton really missed his dish-drying closet. He lamented to me in an email, "Now I have to dry my dishes on a rack that sits on the counter, like a barbarian."
And if you think about it, it is pretty barbaric. We wash the dishes, we set them out and wait for them to dry, only to move them again to another cabinet, and then we repeat that cycle. Or we buy dishwashers that take up space, and then we have to load and unload over and over again. Why not just skip those steps and in the middle and just put your dishes directly in a dish-drying cabinet?
And Anton is clearly really obsessed with this question too. But his desire to spread this regional design isn't just about sharing it with others. It's also self-serving. He hopes to, quote, someday live in the US without having to suffer through a tabletop dish draining stand.
From your lips to God's ears. Okay, Kurt, we'll be back with another good news. Our next story is to take a smart design solution, also to take a smart design solution from another country and import it to the US. We're going to talk about our awful, awful money. US paper currency is so ubiquitous that to really look at its graphic design with fresh eyes requires deliberate and focused attention. So check out this thing on the screen or take one out from your wallet and really look at it. Just take it in. All the fonts, all the busy filigree, the micro patterns. It is just dreadful.
From a pure designer's point of view, that's tough because it is a little bit subjective, but
it's horrible. There are like 8 fonts on this thing.
typographically, graphically, symbolically. If it had never been designed before and someone was to submit that as a solution, I think they would just sort of throw it out.
And I don't want to get too critical at this point because there are some pretty compelling and understandable reasons why it has its particular brand of horribleness. But I think the primary tension embodied in the design of the greenback boils down to how my friend Tom Nelson at the blog Human in Design puts it.
When I handle American money, it feels like an artifact because it's so ornate and it has an old look to it.
Even though paper currency itself, the idea of money, is a massive world-changing technology, the look and feel of US paper money is very stagnant. It seems like a relic from when our country was founded.
Would you buy a car that would still look like the Model T Ford? No, you buy the latest model of it. Things evolve and change with time.
That's Richard Smith. He runs a design contest called the Dollar Redesign Project, or he did.
It's become a classic, like classics do, through time and through usage and through familiarity. So its awkwardness from a design point of view has kind of been superseded by its symbolicness.
So if you were to start from scratch and redesign US paper money, Smith says there are 5 major areas where we could improve. Number 1 is color.
The idea of using one color doesn't really tell you much other than that we like the color green.
Our largely monochromatic money kind of baffles me. We've introduced a purple 5 and some peachy hues, but there are a lot of colors and most countries use at least some of them. Number 2 is size.
But why is the American currency all one size? There's always been a question mark in my head and just never really made sense practically and philosophically.
Having variable-sized coins certainly helps us sort them, and you could use the same principle for bills, which leads us to point number 3 in Smith's manifesto, functionality.
Some functionality that enables people, if they can't see, to clearly distinguish on a very sort of fundamental level which note is which.
The fact that there's no easy way for the blind to use our currency goes beyond bad design, and it's actually immoral.
Then the next fundamental thing I thought was composition.
That's number 4.
Meaning, like, what's it made from? This is a little sort of conceptual into like where this could go, but it just seems that a product designer could come in and sort of come up with something really interesting.
Recycled material with a smaller carbon footprint or more durable synthetics that last longer. And at the very heart of the Dollar Redesign Project is number 5, symbolism.
Who should go on the bills and why? And why are the founding fathers the be-all and end-all of everything that is America? And I think for me, that's one of the biggest issues. If we were to change anything, I would say that would be where I would start. It could be a platform to celebrate everything that is unique, special, different, that you didn't know about America.
And that's a suggestion that can get a British expat that became an American citizen later, like Richard Smith, some really colorful hate mail. But it's an intriguing list nonetheless. Even if you view these 5 suggestions as a philosophical exercise to assess the current design for all its strengths and faults. It's hard to imagine all those things being modified in US currency, but it's not hard to imagine each of them being implemented somewhere. In fact, most of them are implemented everywhere. Case in point, Australia. On the other side of the world, each and every one of these 5 issues have coincidentally been addressed.
Let me introduce a masterpiece of Australian design and technology. Australia's new $5 plastic note.
I'm really proud of our money. I have absolutely no idea why I'm so proud of it, but I really am.
That's Tristan Cook, and you're about to hear why he's so proud. Tristan and Tom, who you heard briefly at the top of the show, are user-centered designers, and they run a blog that I'm a big fan of called Humans in Design that I mentioned. Tristan is Australian, Tom is American, but Tom went to school in Australia for a couple of years, and the money there made a big impression on him.
The money is plastic, and they're all different sizes, and they're colorful.
At first, these changes were disconcerting.
It all just looked like toy money to me.
But after Tom's initial shock, he began to appreciate all the different design characteristics in Australian currency. First, the color.
$5 is sort of a lavender. $10 is blue with a little bit of a green stripe in it. 20 is...
When you look at the ways that you can tell the differences between things, generally it's called coding. That's the very simple human factors term for it. And you code through things like size, shape, feel, and color. So in Australian money, we have ours coded primarily by color.
Which in some ways is a better index because it doesn't require knowledge of who's on the bill. It only requires recognition of a color.
Or an association with a pineapple or a lobster.
It's not very common just yet, but we call our notes colloquial names by their colors. And my two personal favorites are calling the $20 note, which is sort of an orange color, calling it a lobster, and calling the $50 note, which is a sort of a green and yellow color, and calling it a piney, which is short for a pineapple.
It's all about the pineys. Okay, number 2, size.
The bills are also different sizes as well, so they feel different in your hand.
Sometimes when I've got a bit of cash in my pocket, I can tell the difference between a $5 note and a $20 note because of the feel.
I would say that it's about a centimeter difference between each denomination, which between a 5 and a 10 isn't that big, but between a 5 and a 50 is very big. So you get like 4 centimeters difference.
Both number 1 and number 2 relate to the third issue raised by Richard Smith, and that's functionality.
You can see whether you've got a 5, a 10, a 20, or a 50 from the top of your wallet.
Because of the different color and sizes. Number 4 is composition.
It's a thin sheet of plastic.
The polymer notes were developed primarily to combat counterfeiting.
Feels like plastic that you can fold and scrunch up. You can actually put it through the washing machine and it'll be fine.
If you drop a note on the floor of a men's room, you don't really feel bad about picking it up and putting it under the faucet before you put it back in your pocket. These plastic notes cost more, but they last longer.
They tend to last 4 times longer than fibrous paper notes.
So you get notes in Australia that are 20 years old and they pretty much just look the same.
What Australia chooses to put on its currency is more in keeping with what Richard Smith of the Dollar Redesign Project would like to see. It's much more inclusive than founding fathers and monuments, but it's hard to tell if these symbols are conveying much of anything to everyday Australians.
They don't put statesmen on money frequently. There are artists and poets, and I think there are some Aboriginal leaders.
That's another thing too. You could not put prime ministers on our money. We don't have the reverence for prime ministers in Australia.
But most Australians couldn't name the people that are on their money.
I have absolutely no idea who is on any of our notes, except for one side of the $5 note is the Queen, and that's just because I don't want her on there. I'd imagine if you asked any Australian if they know who is on their notes, there would be less than 1% of people who could name anybody other than the Queen.
The symbolism in Australian cash seems to be tied more to the innovation of the bills themselves. There's a certain pride that polymer bills were developed in Australia and have been exported to the rest of the world. Australia manufactures the polymer notes of nearly 20 other countries.
It's a good business for them.
The good design of the currency itself is the overriding brand.
It's no ordinary note, however. It's Australia's new polymer $10 note. And it was developed and printed right here.
I would like to see American currency redesigned and treated more like a living piece of technology rather than an artifact.
I think even the most jingoistic among us could concede that there are design innovations that could be incorporated into U.S. currency to make it better. But there's some interesting reasons why it probably won't.
You know, someone once told me that getting rid of the greenback would be like burning the flag on the steps of the Capitol.
That's David Woolman. Very dramatic.
My name is David Woolman. My book is The End of Money.
To a lot of people, our currency is a physical touchstone to our national identity.
Some of this is emotional, but there is this other concern that is simultaneously tantalizing and scary, I think.
And that other concern is that when you redesign the money, you remind people what currency is and what gives its currency the value.
And of course, what gives the currency value is our belief that it's valuable. And in the religious sense of it, nothing more than faith or trust or worship, whatever you want to call it, makes a dollar worth $1 or worth whatever you're going to buy with it. So that is upsetting to a lot of people. And to maintain the aura of strength and stability of the United States economy,
it probably helps to maintain these legacy features in the design of our money as well.
Through what is now 3 or 4 generations, we've had the same color, I think, since like the Civil War.
The portraits, the engraved styling, the filigree, the legacy features convey stability. Our currency, the currency on which all other currencies are hitched, has to be stable.
So not only do we not redesign the stuff, but we don't pull older notes from circulation either. So we'll have reissues and redesigns of our cash, but you can still use the last generation design as legal tender.
In other countries, a complete redesign deprecates the old design. You're given a grace period to use or exchange it, but after a certain date, the old currency is shredded by the central bank, and you can no longer spend any of it that you might have left. This has never been the case in the US.
You could even use an 18th century coin stamped with just the value of 2 cents to go buy something. You might want to be careful because that could be so stupid. It could be worth, $3,000 to a collector out there. But if you want to go spend it as 2 cents, you can. And again, this is part of creating this aura of super stability and inherent value of Federal Reserve notes.
David Woolman is quick to point out that even though these concerns of instability happen when people bring up redesigning the money or eliminating the penny, for example, he thinks it's pretty irrational and an overly cautious stance.
It seems to me a little bit patronizing to think that Americans couldn't handle a dollar redesign.
But really, who is going to push it forward?
If you're going to go to work in government, don't you almost by definition have some of that sense of patriotism and nationalism that would make you a little bit more inclined to like the greenback as is and a little less inclined to, let some RISD hotshots get after it?
Fair enough. He's making fun of you guys here, right there. Primarily driven by anti-counterfeiting measures, U.S. currency has been pushed to change in recent years. And most of the new designs are why it looks worse than ever. The legacy features remain largely intact, but a layer of modern fonts and swirls makes the bills look like they're busting at the seams. It really is the worst of both worlds.
It's absolute chaos. There's very little that's elegant about our money from a design standpoint, as far as I understand it.
But when I told David Woolman about my newfound discovery and appreciation of the Australian dollar, that it was evangelized by Tristan and Tom, he was less than impressed.
I don't think it's that remarkable. Congratulations to the Aussies and the scientists who came up with polymer banknotes, and I think they profited well because of that innovation. But I'm just not convinced it's a very world-changing kind of thing. It's pretty.
Hey, I happen to think pretty counts. But from this point of view, a better designed banknote, even a plastic note, is still just a piece of paper. I mean, the book is called The End of Money. That's what his book is called. So he's more excited about digital currency that could help us make wiser decisions about our money down the line. But while we wait for that perfect design solution, we will still probably have to endure the $20 bill with its wavy Six Flags amusement park font that says 20 USA in the background. I mean, look at it. You see that one? You know what I'm talking about right there behind the 20? That thing's obscene, right? That offends me. That font is even cruel to Andrew Jackson, and that guy was a genocidal jerk. Okay, so Kurt's going to come back. Another entry of the regional design sweepstakes. This one is also from Australia.
Yeah, I feel like these regional designs are a bit like kids in that you're not supposed to have a favorite, but I do. And it's the Australian Hills Hoist. A fan named Alyssa Stevens introduced me to this wonderful contraption, and the more I learn about it, the more I love it.
Officially, it's called the Hills Rotary Hoist, and it's essentially a rotating clothesline, but it's really just so much more.
It's a quintessential part of the suburban Australian dream, and Alyssa told me that, quote, a dream house on a quarter-acre lot with a big backyard would be incomplete without one.
This everyday design really tells a larger history of Australia, suburbia.
The Hills hoist was developed by an Australian war veteran in the 1940s. Lance Hill built the first one for himself, then he overheard a neighbor admiring it and decided to go bigger and made his first commercial batch from leftover materials. Specifically, he reused old metal tubing that had been part of a World War II submarine trap located under the Sydney Harbour Bridge.
The hoist was a big success in the post-war suburban boom, and even today, the company Hill started sells millions of these things every year in Australia and other countries.
And the Hills hoist is actually listed as a national treasure by the National Library of Australia. It's appeared in museums, it's been on stamps, it's even the logo of an expat rugby team, the Hammersmith Hills Hoist of West London. And as a kid, Alyssa would play a game that involved eating donuts hanging from the lines of the Hills hoist. The goal, she explained to me, was to, quote, hold your hands behind your back and eat as fast as you can. Whoever finishes first wins. Although, she added, with donuts, everybody wins, right?
And people play all sorts of other games with these things too.
Some parents rig up swings for their children on these Hills hoists. Kids also use them as frameworks for blanket forts. Homeowners hang decorations and lights on them for birthday parties and holidays and weddings. There's even a drinking game called Goon of Fortune, inspired by Wheel of Fortune, that involves hanging bags of wine on the line and giving them a spin. And when the bag comes to a stop, whoever it's in front of has to take a drink from it.
So it started out as a simple clothesline, and it still functions that way, but people of all ages have also managed to find additional uses for it, including some pretty practical ones.
And that's what I love about the Hills hoist, how people continue to use it in these new ways. And some of these are simple, like, creating shade by throwing a cloth cover over the top. But there's some wild ones too, like these guys suspending chickens for the lines for backyard cookouts. And my personal favorite, a kangaroo rescuer hanging pouches to house orphaned joeys.
And at the end of the day, what's remarkable in this case isn't so much the original design, it's the way people adapt and use it for everyday objects and find ways to do incredible things with everyday objects. And this brings us to our final regional design that did break out and ended up maybe being one of the most important innovations that shaped art and design of the 20th century. Kurt's going to stay up here with me for this one. Froebel was interested in a lot of things. His mom died right after he was born in 1782, and he was somewhat left to his own devices. It was nature that seemed to fascinate him the most. As a kid, he spent his free time wandering the dense forests of Thuringia in what was then Prussia. It's a lush region sometimes referred to today as the Green Heart of Germany.
Thuringia, das grüne Herz Deutschlands.
Kohlstedt learned German in the same place that he first discovered those tilt and turn windows.
As a kid, I lived for a time in a town called Bayreuth, not too far from Froebel's hometown of Oberweisbach. And the forests there are einfach wunderschön, simply beautiful, and I can definitely see how Froebel became enthralled by them.
He looked at rocks, he studied the trees, he worked with a forester for a while, he was an apprentice forester.
That's Norman Brosterman. He studied Froebel for years.
And Froebel worked for a time as a land surveyor. He even served in the military.
And at one point, he became convinced that he should be an architect.
He did everything you need to become an architect. He took all the right classes.
But he did not end up going to architecture school or becoming an architect or really talking about architecture all that much in his autobiography. He instead became an educator. And in doing so, he may be the most important influence on architecture in the 20th century. He planted the seeds for a garden of ideas that created the art and design of the modern era.
Friedrich Froebel created the kindergarten. And Froebelian kindergartens did something unprecedented. They drilled geometry and abstract thought into children at a really young age, sparking an aesthetic revolution.
Leading to people like Mondrian and the Bauhaus and Kandinsky and Frank Lloyd Wright especially.
If you've ever looked at a piece of abstract art or modernist architecture and thought, my kindergartner could have made that, well, that may be more true than you realize.
Frank Lloyd Wright, the American architect, is the great child of the kindergarten, and he spoke about it often. You can find the kindergarten in everything Wright ever did.
But Froebel didn't just pull his invention out of thin air. Just as he was poised to pursue a career in architecture, he got offered a teaching position at an innovative school built on the principles of Johann Pestalozzi.
Pestalozzi is considered the father of modern education, which basically means they will learn better if you treat them well rather than hit them with sticks, you know?
Froebel was intrigued by this whole not hitting kids with sticks thing, and also by Pestalozzi's focus on listening to children, encouraging them to observe and actively learn from nature, rather than just passively memorizing and reciting facts. And as Froebel developed as an educator, he added his own ideas. He wanted kids to play with three-dimensional shapes rather than just drawing on paper. When he was in charge of an orphanage, he learned the importance of early childhood education, teaching kids way, way earlier in their lives than people thought was useful. And he believed that women should play a leading role in educating children.
But his path from the forests of his youth to the creation of the kindergarten wasn't a straight line. He took breaks from education to fight in the Napoleonic Wars, and his love of nature led him to spend time in the emerging discipline of crystallography.
This diversion in particular into crystallography helped him understand the microscopic building blocks of our universe.
Where most people saw nature in big, flowing, organic shapes like hills and plants and animals, Froebel zoomed in to study the straight lines and geometric forms of crystals, and he basically saw blocks.
In 1839, at the age of 57, after years of developing his theories, Froebel founded what would become the very first kindergarten.
In Bad Blankenburg, dozens of very young kids would wash up in the public fountains each day before school, where they would be taught by a staff made up entirely of women.
The word kindergarten was meant to capture two ideas. Kids would play in and learn from nature, but they would also themselves be nurtured and nourished like plants in a garden. Within a decade, the idea of kindergarten was flourishing. There were over 50 of them in operation.
Today, we take Froebel's influence on education for granted. Of course, kids should learn interactively. Of course, they should be taught from a young age. But he also contributed something else to the world, a set of deceptively simple-looking children's toys.
These are Froebel's gifts.
In German, of course, they roll it all together into one word, Froebelgaben.
Froebelgaben. That was pretty good.
That's pretty good.
I never get that right.
The first of his gifts, a knitted ball, was quite literally a starting point, and it could be given to children as young as 6 weeks old. A wooden sphere and cylinder and cube followed, showing how different geometries worked. Later came more complex shapes and materials. Blocks gave way to sticks and paper and string and wire, and in the end, a completely malleable block of clay.
The idea of having kids play with blocks wasn't a Froebelian invention, but Froebel took it to the next level, organizing structured lessons around these objects.
Kids would sit at gridded desks building all kinds of stuff. The gifts encouraged students to equate ideas and things and symbols. So a single set of blocks could be used to teach counting, and then they could be turned into a house. And then they could be used to tell stories about the people who were living in that house. The idea was that constructive play would give students the tools to think abstractly, modeling the world through geometric forms and learning about gravity and time and geometry and symmetry along the way.
These kindergartners weren't just in school. They were in abstract art school without all the sex and drugs. And when they went out into the world changed.
The kind of art that was being made in the 19th century is really different than the kind of art that was made after kids went to kindergarten.
Expressionist, Cubist, and Surrealist artists like Paul Klee and Vasily Kandinsky attended early kindergartens. Others, like Piet Mondrian, encountered Froebelian methods as teachers. And it wasn't just artists, it was designers too.
Johannes Itten is a name who's not quite as well known, was the first person that Walter Gropius hired when he started the Bauhaus in 1919. Johannes Itten was an actual kindergarten teacher in Vienna before he goes to the Bauhaus. So it's fascinating to me that Gropius decided to hire a kindergarten teacher as the first hire of this famous school of design.
And some of Froebel's most compelling influences can be found in the realm of architecture.
American architect Frank Lloyd Wright was born in 1867, and his mom took classes in kindergarten education.
And when Wright was young, his mother brought home a set of Froebel's gifts.
And this was young Wright's first taste of architectural design.
Frank Lloyd Wright said that the moment he was given Froebel's gifts, he, quote, began to be an architect. He went on to say that for several years I sat at the little kindergarten table ruled by lines about 4 inches wide, but the smooth cardboard triangles and maple wood blocks were the most important. All are in my fingers to this day.
His designs were geometric, but also organic, with careful attention to materials. And in letters, lectures, and memoirs, he often gave a lot of credit to his early experience with these toys and the lessons drawn from the pattern books that had been crafted by these kindergarten teachers.
You know, Wright's architecture has been described as pinwheeling, the overhanging roofs, the wide-spreading arms, and that's just what the gifts do. He kind of blew out the Victorian American house from being a rectangle with a piece here, a piece here, a piece here, and that's exactly what you see in these books of patterns.
Growing up, Wright took courses in engineering, but he never formally studied architecture.
At least not beyond playing with Froebel's gifts. And Wright wasn't the only one. European modernist architect Le Corbusier, like Wright, never went to architecture school, but he did attend Froebelian schools in Switzerland.
Le Corbusier and Frank Lloyd Wright, considered by some the two most important architects or the greatest architects of the 20th century, had exactly the same childhood education.
And Buckminster Fuller, famous for pioneering geodesic domes, first hit upon his greatest engineering insight as a kindergartner, connecting Froebelian peas and sticks.
There's a fantastic quote from Fuller. He says in this quote, God bless him, I couldn't really see very well, but I could tell that if I made a structure out of triangles, it was a lot sturdier than a structure made out of squares.
While most people looked at the world around them and built rectangular structures, this kid with poor vision, peas and a pile of sticks, discovered the power of triangles.
So I made these triangular structures, and the teachers were surprised. In fact, he says, I was surprised that they were surprised. It's such a wonderful thing. Here's this little kid. They actually had him go to the other classrooms to show his structures to the other classes. And then if you know Buckminster Fuller, this is the thing he's most famous for. You know, the domes made out of peas and sticks, basically, nodes and rods. So he learned that in kindergarten.
Obviously, everyone who attended kindergarten didn't become a Frank Lloyd Wright or a Corbusier or a Bucky or a Kandinsky. But the abstract lessons of kindergarten tilled and fertilized the ground so the seeds of their ideas could find purchase in the world.
Abstraction was accepted fairly quickly in Europe, in the art world. And I wondered if, because children had already been doing a lot of the same kinds of things for many decades, that was one of the reasons that they were not so shocked when art turned in that direction.
So in terms of 20th century art and design, kindergarten was an absolute triumph. But there was tragedy too. Friedrich Froebel got to witness the spread of the kindergarten for only about a decade, and then his dream was cut short.
In 1851, the Prussian government issued the Kindergartenverbot, a national ban on kindergartens, his life's work. And Froebel died the very next year.
And, you know, you wonder if he died of a broken heart in 1852, of course.
There are competing theories about why the schools were banned. It may have been because some of Froebel's relatives were activists and agitators, but there's a more obvious potential explanation. Educated, free-thinking people are dangerous to repressive regimes. Froebel had, after all, called his kindergarten the Free Republic of Childhood.
But even though the ban stopped Froebel, it didn't stop the kindergarten. Far from it. The women he championed and placed in charge of all those little abstract artists, they were not deterred. They persisted. They spread the influence of kindergarten around the globe, and in the process, did nothing less than create the 20th century.
I don't think Froebel had any idea this was going to influence art and architecture, and I don't think anybody else did either.
I think the teachers knew. I think teachers always know. Hey, that's our show. Thanks, Kurt, for joining me. Thanks to all of you for being here. I've been told to tell you to take a survey and tell me how great I was, so that I come back. And that would be really, really nice. And I was also told to tell you to go see Beck tomorrow night. But why do you need to be told to go see Beck? It seems crazy to me. 99% Invisible is a podcast about architecture and design. You can go download it, rate it. That'd be nice. Tell your friends about it. That'd be cool. And just join me in this. We've told about 325 stories like the ones you heard today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of them and enjoy your time here at Adobe Max. It was really fun and generous for you to have me. Thank you so much.